Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Learn Blades in the Dark. In this episode, we will be beginning our discussion of downtime activities. So, the text describes downtime activities as follows. Between scores, your crew spends time at their liberty, attending to personal needs and side projects. These are called downtime activities. And these are a special class of activity that happen during the downtime phase. You can do 2 of them per downtime phase normally, and 1 if your crew is at war. Most of these downtime activities can be done more than once in a single downtime phase, so you can repeat the same action twice. If you have the activity budget for it. And you can exceed your normal activity budget, 2 normally and 1 if you're at war, by spending 1 coin or 1 rep per extra activity. So this part of the game has to do with resource management and strategizing in a way that other parts of the game don't necessarily. And because that's the intent, the number of downtime activities are limited, and they involve spending the resources you built up during your scores. So to continue, only activities in the special downtime activity list are limited. So there are other activities you can do during the downtime phase which are not limited. And these are activities you would consider to be free play. As I said in previous videos, you can incorporate free play into the other phases of play in Blades in the Dark. So, for example, gathering information, talking with characters, making action rolls, etc. These kinds of activities involve possibly putting your character into trouble, into risky situations. And so you're going to end up spending resources when you do them anyway. There's a sort of self-limiting character to how many of these you will do in the downtime phase. Even if the amount of them you do and the time you spend doing them, taking a look at them, is of course flexible, just like every other part of Blades in the Dark. You can focus in or you can zoom out as much as you like. But in the case of these free activities, there's no hard and fast activity budget to concern yourself with. So if a player is having a hard time choosing a downtime activity, the GM can suggest a long-term project for them to do. And the reason for this is the downtime activity budget is not something that carries over to the next downtime phase. You get 2 normally, 1 if you're at war, and if you don't spend them, they're just gone. So that's a resource that, as a player, you're going to want to spend. And as a GM, you're going to want the players to spend it so that they are participating in this phase of play, but also so that you can use the opportunity of the downtime phase to see a little bit of what their characters look like outside of scores. And a good way to sink points that don't really need to be spent anywhere else is a long-term project, because obviously they can sink a lot of actions, a lot of activities, because they're long-term. They have big clocks associated with them. And also, in having a conversation over a long-term project, you can kind of work out interesting world details or character details with the players. So this is an interesting or useful way to deal with a player who's really having a hard time choosing during their downtime phase what to do. So to continue, we can talk about the modifiers to doing a downtime activity. So the first is helping. If a friend or contact helps, then the person receiving the help receives +1 D to their rolls, just like on other, say, the action rolls. And investing coin. This has a separate effect from the +1 D you can get from help. It causes the player to receive +1 to their result level per coin spent. So that's not +1 D to their roll, it's +1 to their result level. So for example, a 1 to 3 result becomes a 4 or 5, a 4 or 5 result becomes a 6, and a 6 becomes a critical. So it's not the rolled value that is incremented. It's not the highest value you roll that is incremented, but instead the level. So you don't go from, say, oh, I got a 2 is my highest, and then I spend a coin and I go to a 3. It's instead, I spend a coin and I go to a 4 or 5 result, right? Like a mixed result. I spend another coin, I go to a 6. I spend another coin, I go to a crit, right? It steps up by level of result, not by the number you rolled. So it's an important point to keep track of because it means that the players are going to be a lot more effective than if they were trying to increment the roll result by 1 every time. So to continue, these are the different downtime activities that you can do. These are the items on the list. So the first one is to acquire an asset. The second is a long-term project, which we kind of talked a little bit about before. The third one is to recover. The fourth one is to reduce heat. The fifth one is to train. The sixth one is to indulge vice. So in this video, we're only going to take a look right now at acquiring assets. So let's do that. Acquire asset allows you to gain temporary use of an asset. It doesn't allow you to gain permanent use of it, only temporary. There are ways to get permanent uses of assets, but this is different from the those are different from the downtime activity acquire asset. Acquiring an asset gives you one special item or a set of common items large enough for a gang of your tier. So it's either one special awesome item that you can use as your character, or it's a set of average items that your gang can use. So that should be clear enough. Just to give an example, you get a special high-quality rifle, or you get some run-of-the-mill rifles for your whole gang to use, just to be 100% clear there. So what are the types of assets you can acquire? Well, you can acquire a cohort. So as we were saying, special or common. A cohort, you can get an expert to help you out, or you can get a gang. So, for example, let's say you need protection. Let's say your hideout needs protection. Well, you could get an expert bouncer for your hideout, or you could get a gang of toughs to hang out in front of your hideout and protect it, right? Those are the trade-offs you can get. It's quality versus quantity, to put it very simply. Vehicle. You can get a vehicle, especially useful if you're running a gang of smugglers, but there's other cases where you might want one as well. There are, for example, plenty of canals in Doskval that you might want to take advantage of. Service. So this would just be, a service that you can purchase in the real world. Could be any number of things. And what does temporary mean here, right? So let's get a little bit more specific about what temporary use is. It's one significant period of usage that makes sense for the asset. So that's not entirely specific, but there's a whole lot of different things covered by this rule. So there are a few more specific pointers to kind of keep in mind. It could be one score, right? A vehicle is a good one to think of here, right? You acquire a boat to use for the score. Once the score's up, then you have to return the boat. Until its first use, so a good thing here would be, for example, some kind of bomb, right? You get a special quality bomb. Once you blow it up, it's gone. Or a modest period of disuse. So, for example, if you have those bouncers outside of your hangout, they'll hang around for a while, but if they don't see action, after a while they'll sort of feel like they've done their job and they're going to head off, right? So temporary can mean different things based on different items. And you're going to have to work that out sort of in conversation. What's fair? So the acquire asset roll, you roll with your crew's tier. So however many tier points you have, that's how many dice you roll. The result indicates the quality of the asset. So if you get a crit, you get your tier +2. So you roll dice equal to your tier, and the result is your tier, again, with a modifier. So tier +2, let's say you roll 4 dice, right? Your tier's 4, you roll 4 dice, you get a 2 as your highest result, right? +2 is 4. That's an example. You get a 6, it's your tier +1 is the result. 4 or 5 is your tier straight. And a 1 to a 3 is your tier -1. So your quality bonus can be increased beyond +2 by spending 2 coin for each additional quality level. So remember, with a downtime activity, you can spend 1 coin to increment the result level by 1. In this case, in the case of acquiring an asset, you can go beyond the critical result to tier +3, but you have to spend 2 coin instead of just 1. So that's a little fiddly rule to keep in mind. And some items have a minimum quality level set by the GM that must be achieved for them to be acquired. So, for example, a set of Spirit Warden uniforms require a result of 4+, right? So your tier plus the modifier must equal 4 or higher in order for you to get the asset at all. So that just means, some things are harder to come by. And some things don't exist at a certain lower quality level, right? It's not like you can get a poor quality supercomputer in a sense, right? Like you can I'm sure they exist, but even just getting a supercomputer in real life is of a significant tier, if that makes any sense at all. So one thing to think about when you are considering the asset roll is that the higher your tier is, the greater effect it has on the asset roll. Of course, that's obvious. But its tier is doubly significant, right? Tier indicates the number of dice you roll, but it also gives you the baseline that you are adding to with your modifiers. So if you have a very high tier, There are some quality levels of assets that you can kind of just automatically acquire. Like it's not going to be a big deal to do it, right? You still have to spend a downtime activity to get the item, but you don't really have to worry that you're not going to be able to get it. So, you know, let's say your tier is 4, which is pretty high, right? You're rolling 4 dice. And if you just get a 4 or a 5, you're already getting your tier, which is giving you a value of 4, so you could already get those Spirit Warden uniforms. So the higher tier you are, basically the more resources you have available. Clear enough, but it's very neatly represented in these rules. So further rules for acquiring assets. After the first time you acquire an asset, you get +1d to your next attempt to acquire it. So you get 1 extra dice or 1 extra die to roll next time you try to acquire it. You just kind of, you have your hookup. You know where to go to get this thing. It gives you an advantage. So again, experience is nice. One thing to look out for is that acquiring restricted items gives you +2 heat. We've talked about heat before. What are restricted items? Well, alchemicals, poisons, bombs, dangerous gadgets. These things give you heat if you use acquire asset to get them. However, if you have someone in your crew who is capable of crafting and can craft the thing for you, then you can get them and you take 0 heat for doing it. Of course, there's complications to trying to craft something, and we'll talk about that in a separate video on crafting, but you don't have to worry about heat coming into the picture. So that's an incentive to use crafting instead of just going, well, you know, I'll just spend a coin, get an extra action, and go acquire the asset. No big deal. So assets can be acquired permanently as a crew upgrade or a long-term project. So as I said, you can acquire assets permanently. However, it's not with the acquire asset downtime activity. It's either as a crew upgrade, right? It will be on your sheet as a crew, or it will be a long-term project that you undertake, and so it will require a lot more investment in order to make it available. Like, let's say you want permanent access to alchemicals. Well, maybe you do a long-term project to start up a alchemy laboratory, and that is just permanently producing stuff for you. You might get in some trouble over that, but you no longer have to go acquire asset to get the alchemicals as long as your GM is cool with it. It's also a conversation. All right, so as I said, these alternatives are separate from the acquire asset activity. So in the next video, we are going to, of course, do more downtime activities. We've talked about acquire asset, but there's more to go. So I will see you next time.